Welcome back to the channel. Censorship of the correct COVID-19 policy views has been a big problem this pandemic. We hear a lot about government censorship. Of course, Francis Collins called for a devastating takedown of the Great Barrington Declaration, which was signed by tens of thousands of scientists, and not exactly the way we settle disputes. We have debates, we don't have takedowns. That's one example. Social media, they love to censor things. Even this YouTube channel will probably put something below that says, for COVID-19 information, click on this link, and it will direct you to a CDC pile of garbage, which is flawed CDC analyses. In my opinion, they've done a lot of bad studies. Facebook, for some time, censored people from even debating whether or not COVID could have arisen in a laboratory and had been the subject of lab leak. The New York Times reporter, Apurva Manvi, she said that that idea was racist, even to have that idea, she said on Twitter. Of course, now, not only is that something that we can and should debate, it looks like it's the leading hypothesis for what happened. Censorship is a big problem. It's a big problem when people who think they know the right answer censor people who have opposing viewpoints. And it's a really big problem when they're totally wrong. Enter the latest chapter of censorship, the preprint servers. Yes, the preprint servers are engaging in COVID-19 policy censorship, which I have detailed in my post entitled, Preprint Servers Have Repeatedly Censored Our Work on COVID-19 Policy, an analysis of all of the studies that we have posted from my laboratory, VK Prasad Lab. As many of you all know, I'm a professor and a researcher, and I do epidemiology, and I run a laboratory here at University of California, San Francisco. We call it the VK Prasad Lab because we weren't that creative, but we do health policy. We do cancer drug policy. We do COVID-19 policy. We do anything in the health policy space. We have, over the years, submitted many papers to these preprint servers, and only recently, in the era of COVID-19, have our papers been rejected. What do you need to know? Number one, what is a preprint server? Well, we all know about medical journals. They have different degrees of peer review, and they can accept or reject your articles, and occasionally someone other than your mother will read them, but very rarely. Mostly they're read by nobody, and occasionally they're read by a few other people, and just very rarely they're read by many, many people. And I've published, 450, maybe close to 500 articles now in medical journals over the last 12 years. And I know that business, I know that game. It's a lot of, back and forth. It's an inefficient system. It's going to get replaced in the future. And one way to replace it is this idea called a preprint server. That's a server where, as we do science, we're not waiting for someone to peer review it. We're just posting our scientific reports, our scientific papers on this repository that just stores all these papers. And we're going to let other people write comments if they disagree. And we can have this preprint available while journals are reviewing the article. We can make science available faster and make it freely available. And those are both good things. I like the idea of a preprint server. I like the idea that we can just post our work as we go. The things that people are interested in will get more comments, and journals can choose from articles that appear on the preprint server. I think that's the future. What I don't like about the preprint server is when the people who work there are rabid, politicized, and biased. I think that's a problem. They have to be neutral. And the standard of a preprint server basically is, did you do something that broadly resembles science? And you don't have to agree with it. You're going to have to post it if it, had some sort of reproducible methodology, something it explains what it did. It should be very inclusive. It should try to include as many things as possible. It shouldn't be a gatekeeper. It should be something where people are allowed to engage in scientific debate and discovery. That's what it's supposed to be. But we have found that it's not that. Let me run through the articles. Number one, I have a preprint on Zenodo, yet another preprint server. It's called A Comprehensive Analysis of Articles Submitted to Preprint Servers from the VK Prasad Lab. We went through every article we've ever submitted to a preprint server. That, by the way, is a reproducible, systematic methodology. We're taking one laboratory and we're looking exhaustively at all the articles that came from that laboratory. We submitted this to MedRxiv, which is one preprint server that is strangely in the censorship business, and SSRN, which is run by Elsevier Saunders, a conglomerate corporation. And this preprint, analyzing whether or not they accepted our prior preprints, was itself rejected from both of those preprint servers for, pardon my French, bullshit reasons. That's what they did. They did it, of course, because they know it makes them look bad. They don't want to post a preprint that makes their own preprint server look bad. That's pathetic. You have to post it because it's factually true. You don't get to decide. If you didn't want to look bad, you shouldn't have rejected our preprints all those days. And we're going to get into why they really rejected those preprints, because they're biased. You're going to see that. It's very obvious. All right, SSRN. What are the things they rejected? We have a paper that's entitled Mask Mandates and COVID-19, a reanalysis of the Boston school study. We took the Cowger study from New England Journal of Medicine, we opened up the data window, we got a broader date range, and we reanalyzed whether or not masks lower the rate of transmission in Massachusetts, not all Massachusetts, some Massachusetts schools, which was a sensational New England Journal finding from poorly done observational research. And we show that by just changing the date range, the entire conclusion of the paper is invalidated, and it looks like masks did not slow spread. Of course, the powers that be don't like that paper, and they write, quote, given the need to be cautious about posting medical content, SSRN is selective on the papers we post. And they didn't take it at SSRN. Somebody wrote to me and they said their father created SSRN, and their father would have been disgusted at the conduct of SSRN censoring a meritorious scientific article merely because it calls into question something that, frankly speaking, is pretty stupid, which is masking children with cloth masks, a stupid intervention derived by a moron who cannot read randomized controlled trials, and then pushed with the full force of the federal government with no credible evidence, no randomized data that ever worked in children. To my knowledge, even the randomized trials we did do, Bangladesh, Denmark, and the ongoing Guinea-Bissau, I say ongoing because it's not published yet, none of them even randomized people under the age of 18, so we have no credible data. This is a retrospective observational study with many pitfalls. Merely by changing the date range, you can get the whole conclusion to tip, as we show in our paper. It's very poor credibility science, but SSRN doesn't want to post that critique. Wonder why? Let's go down the list. The next article they rejected, a comprehensive analysis of articles submitted to preprint service from one laboratory. That's the paper itself. And it says, given the need to be cautious about medical content, what do you got to be cautious about now? This is the paper that I'm going to link to in this video that documents that you're rejecting the other papers, and you can't even post that on your preprint server? Your excuses are so flimsy. No one could possibly believe that this paper would require the need to be cautious. It merely documents your prior screw-ups. The next one. Falsification endpoints and the pitfalls of observational research and reviews of the COVID-19 vaccine. A critique of a systematic review and meta-analysis of the BioNTech vaccine in 5 to 11-year-olds. So this is a criticism of that FDA approval, which is extremely controversial, in my opinion, a violation of the regulatory authority of emergency use authorization. And SSRN removed this, saying, quote, given the need to be cautious about medical content, yes, the same boilerplate is incorrect. The next paper they removed, interpretation of wide confidence intervals and meta-analytic estimates is the absence of evidence of absence. This was a paper that Sarah Miller and I did where we took the Cochrane report on masking, and they said masks didn't work. Basically, they said there's no evidence that community masking works. That's their conclusion of Cochrane. And people said, well, just because you couldn't find evidence that it works doesn't mean it doesn't work. That's the absence of evidence is evidence of absence fallacy. And they ran with that, and they said the confidence interval is wide, ergo we should be more cautious, and we should say masks, maybe they do work, maybe they don't work, we just don't know. What we did was we just pulled the last 25 other Cochrane reviews, and we asked, what do they do every other time that the confidence interval is wide? Do they say, well, we just don't know anything because confidence interval is wide? That's not what they say. They say, this don't work, that don't work, this don't work, that don't work. But only for masking, we want Cochrane to have its own language saying, well, now we don't know. Well, that is a double standard, and we wrote a paper that documents that double standard, which, by the way, SSRN removed because of, given the need to be cautious about posting medical content, the same boilerplate. Here's the point. You don't have to agree with me. But this preprint server is not even letting the audience of scientists decide. Who gave them this authority? They don't get to peer review the article. That's not their purview. Their only purview is to check if my spelling is correct, basically. If I've dotted my I's and crossed my T's, I have. And in fact, all of these articles are not just worthy of a preprint server. They're really good articles, by the way. They're going to be published well, and they're going to crush in the citation count. I promise you that. As somebody who's published a lot of articles over the years, like 500 articles, my Hirsch index is about to be 50. That's a metric of citation count. I know what an article is going to get tons of cites. These are going to get tons of cites. They're not going to know, anyway, what to do with all the cites. I mean, there are going to be a lot of citations for this. All right. They did accept a paper that MedRxiv rejected called Statistical and Numerical Errors Made by the US CDC. They were happy to accept that. That article has 40,000 views. I think I got an email from SSRN saying it's like one of their 10 most downloaded articles of all time, maybe. So SSRN takes it, but we're going to pick up that with MedRxiv. COVID-19 vaccines, a history of the pandemic's great scientific success and flawed policy implementation. That's a lengthy article that I've written about the COVID-19 vaccine history that's under revise and resubmit at a journal right now. It's likely to come out, given the need to be cautious. That article merely documents factual things that occurred in the drug development process for the COVID-19 vaccines, including protocol amendments to the original vaccine plan, including the rollout, including the staggered series of EUAs for younger ages. It is a 100% meritorious article. You can read that preprint on Zenodo, which is the one preprint server that I've discovered doesn't play the censorship game. They actually post the things I send there. All right, then they accepted a few articles. Good for them. So SSRN, they know how to accept a few articles. Now let's talk about MedRxiv. A comprehensive analysis of articles submitted from one laboratory to a preprint server, documenting MedRxiv's rejection of prior articles. They removed that, say, quote, MedRxiv is intended for research papers, and our screening process determined that this manuscript fell short of that description. Well, that means you're an idiot, because I have said this is a comprehensive analysis of all of the articles from my lab that I've sent to you, and I've just documented the rate with which you have rejected it, and that is in fact a research project where I'm researching all of the articles from my lab. It's comprehensive, it's systematic. You may object to why did you pick your lab? That's not your purview. That's the peer reviewer's purview, and maybe it won't be accepted in New England Journal, but you can't object to the mere fact that this is a scientific endeavor. Of course, I've documented something in an objective way. I've described exactly what I've done. And they've removed that. But why did they remove it? Let's be honest. They don't want to post on their own preprint server evidence that they're doing a shitty job. They're just covering their own ass. But that's not an acceptable position to hold when you run a preprint server. You got to decide, are you a journal or are you a repository for people to put works in progress? You can't be both. You can't select based on your liking of the paper. Let me go down the list. They removed statistical and numerical errors made by the US CDC during the COVID-19 pandemic. They write, quote, this is not a systematic evaluation with reproducible methodology. Well, interesting you say that. So you decided that it's not a systematic evaluation. Yet on SSRN, it's one of the 10 most downloaded articles in their history with 40,000 downloads. Seems like a lot of people are really interested in this. And by the way, if you actually read that paper, it's unimpeachable. It is a brilliant description. And I'm biased, of course. I was part of the paper, but the genius behind the paper is Kelly, who's the first author. But it's a brilliant description of CDC errors that are incontrovertible, that are numerical errors. They're not even counting the number of dead kids accurately. And they claim to be the agency that's policing information. They can't even count. We've documented that in that paper. And MedRxiv is not letting us post it on their preprint server. Why won't they let us post it? Well, maybe they're a little bit chummy with the people working at CDC and they're a little bit worried about that. That's the only thing I can think of that explains it. We find 38% of the submissions from our laboratory have been rejected or removed. The median number of downloads from a rejected article that's ultimately posted somewhere else versus an article they accepted right away is 4,000 downloads versus 300 downloads. They're 10 times more popular, the ones they're rejecting, by the way. The stated reasons for rejection are bullshit. They said, for instance, that our article documenting CDC errors is not a systematic and comprehensive methodology. But meanwhile, on MedRxiv, I found an article of 9 COVID-positive people who were chosen, quote, because community healthcare workers knew them, because they, the community healthcare workers in brackets, knew them, which is a convenience sample, which is even less reproducible than what we did, which is, in my opinion, quite reproducible. It explains clearly how it was done. Just because you can't reproduce it doesn't mean it can't be reproduced. That's another fallacy that these people who are running the preprint server fall into. The CDC itself based the masking justification on the anecdote of hairdressers in Marin County, let's not forget. That's the basis of the recommendation. Now you're telling me my preprint is not up to snuff? That's the basis of the CDC's policy recommendation, the lowest level of evidence imaginable. So what's my point here? It's about censorship. It's not just big tech. Big tech, of course, the reason they censor is that everyone who works there knows nothing about medicine. They know very little about science. They may know something about technology and algorithms, but they don't know anything about real science and real epidemiology. And they're very scared that government's going to crack down on them. So they just bend over for whatever FBI agent or whatever agency tells them to remove something. They really are spineless jellyfish with no commitment to free speech or anything like that. I kind of get where they're coming from. They're corporatists, and the organization is stacked with people who are just groupthink and political puppets. But okay, so fine. Okay, that's the big tech. Okay, Francis Collins wanting to stifle the discussion on lockdowns. Pretty poor taste, in my opinion. Those emails were FOIA'd. They were critical of Martin Kohlsdorf and Jay Bhattacharya. They called them fringe epidemiologists. Every day that goes by, Martin and Jay look more and more vindicated, and Francis and Anthony Fauci look more and more bad. So they shouldn't have stifled that discussion. They should have had that discussion. A discussion about lockdowns would have been really beneficial to us all. But again, I kind of understand them because they're just trying to protect their own ego and bad policy making. Okay, because they're not really good. They never were. Neither of them built their career on good policy. One guy sequenced the genome. He does. What does he know about policy? And I just want to make a point here. If you want to comment about healthcare policy, on national policy, on epidemiology policy, it helps to study policy. Actually, it's its own endeavor, its own field of study. But the preprint servers, this is what really gets me. They come out there and they say, we're the place that's going to post anything scientific and have a broad debate. We're not going to be a gatekeeper. And yet they are a gatekeeper. They're a gatekeeper for their friends, for the views that they like. They're inconsistent. They have no principle that explains the articles they've accepted and the articles that they're rejecting. They're rejecting 38% of our articles because these are critical of establishment COVID-19 policies. We're going to get these articles through. You can't stop us. We're going to put them on a different preprint server. We're going to ram them through the journals. They're going to drown you in citations over the next 20 years. We're going to build the case that in many respects your policy was flawed. We'll build the case only in the cases where you did screw up. It's going to be a factual case, and we're going to let history decide. Meanwhile, you're going to try to stop us by banning us from your preprint server because you're inconsistent and have no principles, and you really are a spineless jellyfish too. And that does surprise me, because I assumed the people who built these preprint servers had a spine and had some conviction and had some principles. I didn't know that they didn't, and that is a disappointment. So censorship is always wrong. The COVID-19 pandemic is in fact a great example of how censorship is how people in power suppress minority views, even when those views are meritorious, like toddlers shouldn't mask, schools should be open, you don't need to mandate boosters, you shouldn't mandate boosters in young men, nobody who had COVID should have to get the vaccine. Those are sensible medical policies that are correct. History will vindicate them. They were all censored at one time or the other. The origin of the virus is something that needs to be investigated and will ultimately be decided by history. The fact that Facebook didn't allow you to have that discussion, that's really bad. This is bad stuff. This is literally what people who feared government and abuse of free speech, what that looks like, that's actually come to pass. Okay, so all the worst fears have come to pass. It's going to be abused more in the future, by the way, because people don't seem to be cognizant of these issues. It's going to be abused more in the future. The preprint servers are really a disgrace. I'm going to link to my Sensible Medicine article. I'm going to link to my preprint about the preprint servers. I encourage you to take a read of it, and I encourage you to put some pressure on these. I've had a lot of people tell me that SSRN and the corporation that runs it was not founded on this principle of censorship, and yet the people there don't have the courage to post multiple meritorious submissions. And I think they should face some pressure. MedRxiv, pretty distasteful in my opinion. You have a post, you have something on your preprint server where they asked 9 COVID-positive patients things. How do they pick those 9? They were people who they knew, community healthcare workers knew. That's not reproducible. My statistical and numerical errors is reproducible because I'm explaining to you how we've documented it. It's reproducible by us because we're the ones who've documented it. You didn't post ours, but you posted that. That's a lower level of evidence, in my opinion. It speaks volumes. It speaks to the fact that you're not acting based on a principle. You're acting based on the conclusion that you don't like, that the CDC is making a lot of errors. But if you don't like the conclusion, then here's how you can solve that. You can go to the CDC and fix it because they are making a lot of errors. They screwed up big time. They got pretty much most of the big decisions that landed on their desk wrong. They're run very poorly. I hear that they have 40,000 employees, most of whom live on Zoom. I would fire half those people the first day I was in charge of that agency because they got to go. You can't have a government jobs program for people who can't get anything right in the time of crisis. And so I think if they didn't make the mistakes, I would support them just as I supported them pre-pandemic, but they made too many mistakes, and some of those mistakes are really bad, and I think they have to be fixed. And we documented that. And our documentation was so good that, in fact, it's one of the most downloaded articles on SSRN. And more to the fact is that even though all these scientists who don't like our conclusions have read it, nobody has offered any reasonable critique of that piece. So, censorship, always bad, especially bad on COVID-19 policy. It's really bad to be the censor and be wrong. And it's really bad to be a preprint server and have no principles and be a spineless jellyfish. So, if you like this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. Let SSRN know that they're doing a lousy job and they're not adhering to the principles that their founder would have wanted. Let MedRxiv know that they're doing a lousy job. And if you are a billionaire watching this, or even a multimillionaire, you can solve the problem easily. Give me a call. We make our own preprint server. That's all we can do. It's an easy computer. Anyone can make a preprint server. We make our own preprint server, and our principle is we're not going to be biased. We're just going to post science. If it's spelled correctly, we're going to post it, and we're going to let the marketplace of ideas handle it. Anyone can do it. We can do it too. Just needs a little bit of capital to get some tech person to do the coding. I don't know how that works, but let me know. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. Until next time.